So what we're going to do is talk about failure. So what is failure, first thing? What do people think failure is? Underachieving, yep. Anything else? Not hitting targets, yep. Anything else?
Great source of feedback.
Great source of feedback, yep.
Opportunity to do better.
An opportunity to do better, yeah. Some really interesting points here, isn't it? Failure. I'm going to ask you one question, which we come to quite regularly. Who controls it? Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's you that actually controls and decides when you fail. It's no one else. So what I want you to do now is think about your greatest personal failure. And I want you to have one in your mind. I want you to bring it into the room here. Have you all got one? Something in life that didn't go well. And I just want to relate to it, and we'll come back to it several times in the question. So we've all got them. Let's do it. So why has failure got such a bad press then? It's funny. In the UK, we don't even talk about it really. And we don't talk about it for that reason. Because failing is bad. You just think of our education system, think of how we grow up. Think if you fail, you get told off. If you fail, you don't do things. We've got a lovely organisation, which is also CDS, called Motivate Southwest, where we deal with the most disenfranchised and disempowered young people and bring them back into society where they can perform a useful purpose. And it's quite interesting because they basically have been told throughout their life that they have failed. And I want you to go back to the point of failure when your single most personal aspect of failure was. And I want you to think when it occurred. Did it occur when you were young, vulnerable, and I suspect the vast majority will have done, and didn't have the perspective that you need to truly look at your life and put things into perspective? And how much influence has that had on your life ever since? Because failure is not just about the incident itself. The thing that really inhibits people is the fear that comes with it, and the fear of doing it again. And that really stops people in their tracks if we don't approach it in the right way. And that's what we do, normally with failures, as quickly as we blinking well can, and we like to forget about it. We like to be positive in our disposition. Human nature is about being positive. It's about doing so. Forget the failure, get it out, get it away. Yet where do we learn our greatest lessons? How do we learn our greatest lessons? Success is fantastic. It gives you a warm feeling. It's wonderful. And we can reap, but actually the greatest lessons are learnt in the things that we haven't succeeded in. And how do we use those to be truly effective? So we're going to flip the carpet. We're going to have a look at failure now today, and we're going to actually talk about it a little and explore it. So, we'll talk about the individual perspective on failure. We've got our personal failure. I want you to think about this guy. What's failure to him? He's a hoodlum, a hooligan, Italian in origin. I've got them from all around the world, as you'll see later on. What does he think failure is, and how does failure work for him? Jeff Bezos. What does he think failure is, and how does it work for him? Is the loss of £2 million to him a failure, or just an experiment? How does it work? How does this bloke feel? This is a Mexican beggar on the street. What's his perspective on failure? How does that work? And an African girl in jail. What's her perspective on failure today? And how does that work? Because we reverse that, we look about success as well. And it's all that individual perspective. And that's what failure is about. Failure truly is about how you view things, not how everyone else views things. And yet we accept a lot of times that when we're told we fail, particularly early on in life, that we failed. It's only when you give up that you fail. It's only when you choose not to continue that you fail. So what brings and what affects our view on failure? It's our values, our attitudes, and our beliefs. And where do they come from? Because if we think of those pictures that we had before, what values, attitudes and beliefs do those 4 people that we've talked about before in terms of where they were and their perspective on failure, where did they come from? Well, they come from our parents. Believe it or not, 50% of your happiness is controlled by your genetics. Interesting. Fortunately, none of us have got dreadfully sad parents all the time, so there's quite a bit of positivity in that. But our parents, in terms of the genetics, but also in terms of how they brought us up, influence us phenomenally in terms of our idea and our own perspective on failure. Our peers. That's the only picture I could get of peers, so it's the one I used. But they actually influence us. And when we think back to that personal failure again, and think about that personal failure, we think about the influence our friends have had when they've told us we're a failure, how we feel rejected by them, and how that works if it's at that young age. They have a tremendous impact on us and our perception of when we're failing and when we're succeeding. And also the media. Now, however it comes and whatever is formed, it basically impacts on us. The media is quite an interesting thing because it brings success into our living room. Our television introduces this concept that everyone in life can succeed. We all, as boys or as girls, want to be film stars, as boys want to be footballers, rugby players. I dare I say football in here? Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. But it's that sort of effect. It's accessible. You can do it because it's there. And what's interesting is when you're watching something in your front room, your emotions are as attached to that as if it was happening in real. So we all get terribly disappointed. Having that perspective is so important, and truly gaining that perspective in terms of where we are and what we're doing and what we can do and what we can achieve. And actually putting these influences into perspective too. So, what defines failure? It's you. And you're the one that's actually going to define it or take it very much, as Steve said at the back there, as feedback and move on. Because if you take failure as feedback, it's merely a phase you're going through to get to something. When you cease to do something is when you truly fail. And that fear is the thing that will inhibit you from doing something later on. So we've looked at failure now, and I love this one. And there was a man who truly could continue. If you're going to hell, keep going. Another line from him. Truly able to keep a nation going to his sheer resilience. So how well did you deal with your failure? I just want you to think about that failure that you've thought about, that personal failure. And why, if you dealt with it phenomenally well, brilliant. But I suspect most of you won't have dealt with it phenomenally well because you'll have remembered it for such a long time. So how good are you, and what were the things that truly impacted on you in that personal failure? What was the thing that gave you the perspective you had of failure at that time? Just have a little think. What would you change about that? How would you think now with your own perspective? And how much impact did that failure have on your life since it happened? Because what we're going to do now is talk about resilience. This is the Kenyan marathon runner finishing the marathon on hands and knees, refusing help and assistance from every direction because if she did, she'd be disqualified. So what is resilience? Resilience. And how do you actually make sure you've got enough resilience in this modern world where you're bombarded with all sorts of stuff from outside? It's about two things. It's about how mentally tough you are, but it's also about how vulnerable you are as well. Because if you're just mentally tough, you'll keep going, you'll keep going, you'll keep going. Resilience is also having that ability to change when you have to change and recognizing the moment when you have to change rather than keeping going. And academics looking at resilience at the moment are very much on the vulnerability track. We keep going so long, but we've also got to know when to stop and when to change direction. And that takes a lot of courage as well. It takes a lot of mental toughness to choose that and to recognise the vulnerability. So the balance in mental toughness is really fascinating. What is mental toughness? And you look at the rugby players tomorrow. It's how they deal with challenge, the challenge on the pitch, how they take it and how they look at it and how they use it. How committed they are to what they have to do, to the people around them, and to their own success. How confident they are in their abilities, both in terms of their abilities to do stuff, but also in their interpersonal social abilities. Because it's about the team around us at times too. In fact, on that pitch, it'll be about the team around them quite a bit of the time too. Because that's the teamwork and that social responsibility will play into it. It's about control. The ability to control your own emotions, but also how much life control do you want and need. It's great to be flexible, because you can be inherently flexible and move and shift. But actually it's great to be controlled. It's the balance between the two that really gives you the ability to maneuver your way through life. And knowing when to be flexible and knowing when to be totally in control. We've all had those lovely bosses in our lives who are total control freaks. We've all had the ones who've been inherently flexible. And we know which ones we like best and how we work. And we're all different in that. So, what's vulnerability about then? It's your personal confidence and your esteem. How confident are you in yourself and your own abilities? And that ability to judge when you're getting overconfident. Tough. Particularly if you're supremely confident. How do we do it? And that's why a lot of people struggle when they move on in life to different roles where they don't have the confidence and the capability to do it. Next one's quite interesting as well. Why have I put that up there? Paranoia. Paranoia is the thing that will keep you out of jail at times. It is the thing that will stop you from doing some foolish stuff. It is the thing that will allow you to prepare yourself for failure, to prepare yourself so that it doesn't become permanent, but it becomes feedback and you move on from it because you are prepared for it. It also allows you to spot opportunities because you're looking for things where you're vulnerable. You're horizon scanning to make sure you do it. And the last thing is that attitude to failure. And what do I mean by that? This is truly when we get into the fear of failure and recognizing that failure is not permanent. You can shift it, you can change it, you can make sure it becomes feedback and move on from it and use it to get to the right place. Thomas Edison, innovation. A failure is just stopping one route until we get to the right route. And once we've killed enough routes, we get to the place where we succeed. So we've looked at personal failure. I want to look a little bit about organizations and how they work and how they view failure, because I think this is the key aspect. Individuals, fine, that's great. But actually organizations don't like failing. And organizations, particularly when we're in groups, don't like failures within us. We like to hide them even more so than we do as individuals. We're probably more honest with ourselves as individuals than an organization is in terms of how it fails. And why is that? Quite simply, look at these names. And there's the evidence. And I could reel down a list of names of hundreds of them if you wanted, because they all think they're going in the right direction. They haven't used the lessons of failure, they haven't spotted the lessons of failure, and they haven't moved on. Kodak, invincible. What's digital? Jessop's, best customer service in the world, except it's not online. Come and see the camera, look at it, feel it, we'll give you a whole thing on it. Then go and buy it online, cheaper. Blockbuster. Ooh. Gone are the days where we got the popcorn and the DVD or the video and put it on for the family. We now bring it in with Netflix or Amazon Film. Phones for you. Actually, we're in the middle here. We've got suppliers of phones and we've got customers. When the suppliers realise that they can go direct to the customers, where are we? Out of business. All of them, not recognising, not identifying, not having the paranoia to realise where they were. This is a really important diagram for organisations, because an organisation that's going to have success and going to have longevity is an organisation that truly knows and understands its environment, which is the most powerful thing that it is and the thing that will kill it quickest. The next most powerful thing is its culture, the green circle there. And what do I mean by culture? I think Barclays Bank had the best definition of culture pre-Libel. Came from a director in Barclays Bank who said it's how people do things around here when no one's looking. We know what they were doing when no one was looking. So you can have a bad culture, but you can have a good culture. But that is a really powerful thing, and it's more powerful than leadership. And that's why a chief exec at times can be drummed out of an organisation, because basically he hasn't understood the culture of the organisation. And if we get a gap appearing between leadership and culture, then basically the energy of the organisation will take place there, and it will fight itself. And we all know organisations that have that at the moment. You have to look at the National Health Service and look at several other things, and you've got leadership fighting culture. And that's why it's not. Leadership needs to lead culture, and culture will change, but culture, they need to understand it before they can lead it. Otherwise, they will merely manage the leaders in an organisation, because they can't influence, they can't motivate, they can't lead. And the final thing is strategy there, which is that planning for the future. And that strategy has to be in tune with everything else. So these all have to be aligned perfectly. If you're going to have an organisation that lives forever, those all must be aligned perfectly. And that is how we do things now. This line is how we do things in the future on this side. And getting that right means you will have an organisation that has longevity. So let's just think about success in your organisation. Celebrate it, fantastic, brilliant, and the power that brings. What about failure? What do we do about that? Ask those questions. Because that's really where the power of failure is, and why we should be embracing it in the UK far more than we are prepared to do so in many organisations. So where does it sit in your organisation? What's the culture that you associate with it? What's the leadership? What's the strategy on it? And are you aware of your environment enough to avoid it? You never will totally, but you may avoid some. The problem with the modern manager is they have to balance things. Failure is great, but if we accepted it the whole time, what would happen? We'd have an organisation that disappeared, wouldn't we? Failure needs to be balanced. Because you make a failure once, that's generally all right, isn't it? Because isn't it? I mean, if you make a failure the first time, if you fail somewhere, it's normally okay to get it wrong once. But if we get it wrong twice, we begin to wonder about judgment, don't we? We begin to wonder about how you're doing and what you're doing. So perhaps we need to change things. And the problem with the modern manager is they want this acceptance of failure because they want innovation, they want people to do things, they want people to experiment, to use their powers, to get on and do things. But they also want control. And it's the balance between the two that actually creates the right. And have you got the balance right with your managers and your leaders in terms of allowing people room to learn, at the same stage controlling them so they don't go too far off track? And those scales are exactly what that is about. Failure. Those are lots of different types of failure. Are they all bad? Exploratory testing? No. But when we get up to the top level, where the blame seriously increases, deviance and inattention and lack of ability, then we're looking at leaders as well. We're not just looking at the people who failed. We're looking at how in the organisation that failure happened. Failure rarely happens because of one incident. It's normally about the complexity of an organisation and a combination of things that present that failure. And if we look at the major failures in the world in terms of airline industries or anything else, it's normally a group of things that have failed that mean that the incident takes place. So, that's key. Because if someone is failing different, and organisations are beginning to measure failure and measure how many times people fail, because if they've got a handle on failure, they know how innovative people are being within the organisation. Because if you're failing more, you're trying more, you're pushing the envelope more. Organisation life cycle. Whew. Where does failure sit in here? Thin, hungry cat to fat cat. Where is your organisation and how does that affect the risk you're prepared to take? Because that's quite interesting as well. When you've got nothing, failure is easy. It's almost where you start from. It's actually when you've got something and something's really growing that failure becomes more and more difficult and you become more and more risk averse. And then you slide down this side to become slim again, to start the process again. Look at every empire that's ever existed and you see that cycle. Failure is also important when we talk about innovation. Red ocean, blue ocean, everyone happy with red ocean, blue ocean, or do I need to just give you a little bit on it? Happy? No, not happy. That's brilliant. Red ocean, blue ocean are two strategies. Red ocean is where the sharks swim, and there's blood in the water, and it's basically when you're competing for your room. Supermarkets of the world live in the red ocean. They fight for their bit, and they hold off everyone else around them. Blue ocean is when you're leading the way, swimming out in front of those sharks, and you're truly actually thinking about being truly innovative in what you're doing and how you're doing it. Problem is if you get too blue ocean, you swim ahead of your customers so far that they don't even catch up and you've got a problem. But the balance of an organisation is which one do you want to be? Because failure, when you're in the red ocean, is far less palatable than it is when you're in the blue ocean. And so deciding where you are, well, this should help you decide what your idea on failure is and what your policies on failure are. So what are the lessons from what I've said? Basically, organisations need to have a degree of culture, a degree of paranoia, and a degree of resilience within them to truly succeed. And by those things, culture is that. Really interesting. Went to Hinkley Point B the other day, stood on top of the reactor, quite stimulating, and basically, or thought-provoking, should we say, they have an amazing culture there. Even the chief executive can be challenged if he doesn't hold on to the handrail climbing up the stairs by anyone in the organisation. Safety, because of the impact of getting it wrong, is phenomenally important. And they absolutely challenge anyone. They criticise anyone, and they even have peer reviews from people from China, people from Russia, people from everywhere else, inspecting them, looking at them, seeing how they can improve. The openness of that in terms of learning, quite amazing. And that culture where there's no blame because of the impact of an accident, quite phenomenal. Paranoia. Scanning that environment, looking for it, spotting it, expecting the unexpected. Very much what we used to do in the Royal Marines. When you land somewhere, you don't know what's in front of you. So you've got to be ready for as much as you can be. And resilience. Part of that resilience is taking that hard learning and dealing with that hard learning within your organisation. He hasn't done badly for himself, has he? So how can you do it? First thing with any failure is you've got to fix it. You've got to accept it in terms of it's going to be there. When you put complexity, humans, needs and problems together, inevitably there's going to be a failure somewhere. How you deal with it decides whether it's going to be a failure or feedback. Make sure people know what you're doing. Make sure you learn from it. Make sure you truly invest in it. All too often, failure remains with the person who failed and in their brain and not in the organisational brain. Learning must be spread from it. You mustn't be frightened of it. Don't hide it under the carpet. Get it out. The airline industry, near misses. They even confess to failures that might have happened. A useful thing. Measure it. Understand why it happened so you don't have to repeat it. Record it so that the memory is there for a long time, and exploit it so you can succeed because of it. I love that quote. Because eventually you succeed. And it's not new. None of us think it's new. Rudyard Kipling even put it in his thing. Any questions? Points? Thought-provoking? You're quiet. Bored stiff? Any points? Interesting? Change things? Change how you look at failure? So important. And yet we in the UK hide it so often.